Better plan fast, because your recess is just about over. You talk about liberty, and you talk about justice, and you talk about peace. Liberty, justice. A white woman in America didn't get the right to vote to 1920, and that's your mama? Came over on the boat with you, spit you out of her belly? You laugh and you clap about the Berlin Wall falling down, but when ERA was voted down, where were you then? And not one black state legislator in this country voted against ERA. There was white state legislators, predominantly men. And I said, if this white boy ain't willing to liberate his mama, I know my mama better stay in the house. A white woman in America, 1992, with a doctor's degree, make 56% less than a white male that dropped out of high school. And you talk about liberty and your right to pray. What God you praying to? And this is what the game is all about. Any damn fool should have been able to look. I'm hooked to 2 cops here, and you running with a gun towards me. It's normal. These cops think I'm coming after them, and them 2 cops ain't reached for their guns yet. And y'all don't see through that crap? Greed. Somewhere. The Houston morning paper is the only paper that had guts enough to run a front page story that the CIA ripped off the savings and loans. And you ain't nothing but chumps. If some welfare mothers would have ripped you off for $688 billion, their ass would be on their way to the electric chair. But right now, every American, including you, is paying to the tune of $20 a month to the year 2030. And you ain't gonna say a damn thing, because when power, one thing about white folks in America, you do understand real power. And you know if you mess with the wrong people, they will blow your ass away. And I was damn near a grown man before I realized who the real niggas are in America, not us. You. They do what they want to do. They take you to war when they want to take you to war. They tear your butt to Vietnam. And I'm so stupid thinking you white folks, I follow you. I thought you really had your stuff together. We didn't go to Vietnam to win a war. We went to Vietnam to interrupt their dinner. That was the rice bowl of the whole world. Laos, Indonesia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Burma. And we wiped it out, the rice bowl of the world now. They call it the rice cup. It's Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, and California. CBS, NBC, ABC, NBC, owned by General Electric, that handles damn near 71% of defense contracts, and you're going to turn that crap on to try to learn something? And we black folks thought you white folks had your stuff together. That's why we wanted to be like you. I do not believe we've gone beyond the point of no return. Here's an example in this room, an example this weekend. This is what America is really about. This is what America is really about. This is what real power is about. An integrity locked inside of your bosom. And I know what you've been through. God, when I think about Doug, I ain't lying. I was lucky they ain't wiped you out. Because I kept saying, do you know what he's doing? I mean, do you understand how big this is? But I said, thank God somebody's willing to do it. And that's what real liberty is about. It's about questioning everything, but be careful how you question it. That's what God is about, question. Little children, Daddy, how come when I see you naked, your chest don't look like mommy's chest? They asked it with love, not with viciousness. And nobody should be upset over what the CIA is doing, what the FBI is doing, especially you researchers. It's called metamorphosis. And you got one form of metamorphosis where a little old tadpole metamorphoses into an ugly, bubble-eyed bullfrog hopping around on the ground that I can stomp to death. That's what the CIA and the FBI and the people that covered this up. And you got the other metamorphosis. It's what I look at when I see you and what you've been through. That old ugly caterpillar that was out there struggling. Nobody never loved the caterpillar. They're ugly, they funny, don't nobody care about them. Nobody's ever gave you a caterpillar as a gift or said, I love you, take this caterpillar. But it kept on going and it kept on going and it found that tree and it survived and it went through that storm and that heat and that insult, and out of that cocoon came a beautiful butterfly. That's what you are. And there's not a butterfly on this planet that's stupid enough to waste its time in energy discussing bullfrogs. And I tell you something about that little butterfly. He can fly all the way across the Pacific Ocean. He can fly all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, but the bald eagle can't make that trip. And there's a book out now called Chaos. Some scientists doing their research found out that butterflies flapping their wings in Peking decide what the weather pattern is going to be like in New York 9 months later. I say to you butterflies, don't underestimate yourself. Some butterflies make it and some don't, but those that make it is so beautiful. And this is what this whole game is about. All them vicious forces, they represent the sun sitting on a sick, slimy, degenerate system. And the decent Americans that stand up and fight and don't mind dying, if you come to that, you represent the new morning. It is a new order, and it's not what Bush and them are talking about. This new order is about God and about honesty and about truth and about justice and about love and about peace. That's what the new order is going to be about. And those of us that understand that, we'll survive it. I look at all my files. Every time I look around, I get my files. The FBI say, how you get them? Black folks and the janitors all over the world. Proud of them. Proud of them. February the 5th, 1965, this top secret memo went out to 8 of the most powerful FBI agents in the Bureau. Subject, assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, November the 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas, miscellaneous information concerning Dick Gregory. Wow, me in the top secret little nappy head, black dude born 1932 during the Depression on welfare, didn't know where my daddy was and then carried myself in such a way I'm in the FBI's top secret file. Hot damn. Woo! What am I doing in the Kennedy assassination file? The FBI, all they said about that mess was the CIA, the FBI, and the Mafia shot him. Page 2. Gregory's background. Bureau files indicate Gregory in the past have supported the black Muslims. Thank God I didn't join him. Injected himself into the racial movement. Injected. I read that, I said, maybe this will rub off. Espouses causes and individuals closely associated with the Communist Party. That's how they trick white folks. White folks used to react to communism the way black folks used to react to the ghosts. And in all fairness, the way we black folks used to be scared of ghosts, if we'd had as much power as you, we probably would have wasted our money building surface-to-air ghost missiles. And folks on the moon talking about, isn't any ghosts up there, baby? Recommendation, we have long suspected that Gregory is demented. Shit, I could have told you that. But nevertheless, the comments he has made is utterly ridiculous, and we should confront him and let him know in no uncertain terms that he better stop putting out such gutter talk. The United States government talking about killing me. April 23rd, 1968, from the director of the FBI, he even put his serial number on it.
Yeah, that's
I didn't know how to play this in lottery number. I lived in Chicago at the time. Chicago, comma, Office of Origin of Richard Claxton Gregory, comma, also named as Dick Gregory. Chicago should develop counterintelligence measures to neutralize him. This should not be done in the nature of an expose, since he already gets far too much publicity. Instead, comma, sophisticated, comma, completely untraceable means of neutralizing Dick Gregory should be developed. Try that in a country where America is so locked into greed, you thought the CIA and Hoover sit next to the right hand of God, but it was some of us out here knowing that they would blow you away. Try that with a wife and 10 children and never knowing when they're going to slip the dope on them, or never knowing when one of them go to school and come home dead, or never knowing when they're going to slip up and disgrace you just to discredit you. But I would sit and say to my wife, whatever the price we pay is worth it. Because of the Malcolms and the Martins. Because of all the beautiful people. When I sit as a little child and read the story of Psycho and Vanzetti, when I read about the Jews and the Irish Catholics and all the folks who had suffered long before I was born, but they suffered with the type of dignity that cleared a path for me. And I never made a decision based on how will this affect my wife or my family. My decision always been, how will the actions of my wife and my family affect the total outcome of the glory of America and eventually this whole planet. And so one day he put the master one out. May the 5th, 1968, from the director of the FBI, Chicago, concerning a speech by Gregory on April the 28th, 1968, where he noted that syndicate hoods are living all over. I thought Hoover knew that. They are the filthiest snakes that exist on this earth. That's how I feel about the mafia. And because I said that, here's Hoover's second paragraph to the Chicago FBI. Consider the use of this statement in developing counterintelligence operations to alert La Cosa Nostra to Dick Gregory's attack on them. Y'all gonna play your games, yeah? All right? And this was a time when the FBI was denying that there was a La Cosa Nostra. This is what we've been through. When I sit here and look, when I picked up the paper one Sunday, didn't even know who Cyril was, never met him. When I found out all that mess that went on in a damn football game, and I said to my wife, it's worth it. It's worth it, because we're going to win this one. But do you know what it's like living in a country where I thought you white folks had your stuff together, talking about freedom, willing to blow everybody else off the goddamn planet, and then I got to look at some files with the FBI talking about, let the mafia know what he's saying about they'll kill him for, and y'all, then I turn on TV and see your cronkikes. Hear y'all talking about burning flags. When you finance thugs that burn up people all over the world. Well, I tell you what, if there's not a God, you in good shape, but if there's any God at all, and it is that say what go around, come around, you better get ready. And I'm talking about all of us sitting up here, because when we was doing our little assassination information, when we got on them planes, they charged us tax, and out of our tax money, we bought bombs that been dropped on women and children around the world. And when them bombs fall on your women and children, I hope you can take it as nice and with the same dignity the Vietnamese have taken it. The same dignity the Pan Americans have taken it. And understand Hitler and them Nazis. They thought they had their thing made. They didn't know that there was a God. And we keep playing games. Hollywood keep playing games. They talk about Hitler's army, the Russian army, Patton, that's crap. These old evil men will never tell you the real story that happened to Hitler. He put a 6th division together that was second to none. They don't write about it. They don't do movies. It was damn near an extension of God. It was the only military in the history of the planet where you had to take their supplies 400 miles ahead of them because they didn't even slow down to eat. And they went into Stalingrad and Leningrad and hit it and peeled into Moscow and killed 1.5 million Russians in a day and a half and sent the word back to Germany. By the weekend, the world is ours. That was Tuesday. Wednesday, God sent winter time early. And that mightiest military might that ever been put together was bogged down in snow. They brought all the fighting equipment, but they forgot to bring their long draws. And the reason the Russians don't never talk about the Geneva Convention, every one of them surrendered, and they took all of them clothes off of them, buck naked, and froze every one of them to death. And when the word got back to Germany, Himmler couldn't believe it. That's why he committed suicide. That's why Hitler committed suicide. And what don't nobody want to talk about is that whole SS group threw a party and everybody sit in the room and all of them drank poison and committed suicide because they couldn't believe it neither. That's the power of God, not another army. The same thing that brought Hitler to its knees is the same thing that brought Napoleon to their knees. a little thing called snowflakes, a little thing that I used to ball up and me and my friends throw on one another. A little thing as a little child I'd run out the house and play with. That same snow children play with, and we sing dreaming of a white Christmas, brought the mightiest army. That's the power of God. And I say to you tonight, there is no CIA, there is no assassination in the art of God. And they will crumble. They will be brought to their knees like everybody else. Oh, I was thrilled one day when I picked up the Chicago Tribune and the headline is me and old ugly J. Edgar Hoover, front page, FBI memo, use mob against Dick Gregory. My friends in the ghetto believe that I got special power. Say, what it look like? I said, what it is, baby. I haven't lived in the ghetto in a long time. I go through there just to go through the hood every now and then just to. I was in the neighborhood the other day, saw the black cat standing on the corner and say, what it is? It's a stick up, nigga, put them both up. But I could handle it, baby. I reached in my pocket, took out my money and said, y'all hurry up and take this. I'm on my way to get my AIDS shot. You can buy it. They call the police on me. And I think about that FBI memo, and I never knew when they was putting that out on me in 1976, I would co-author this book with Mark Lane called Codename Zorro, The Murder of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And I never realized that because of this type of information and what you all were doing, this country would be forced to open up a congressional hearing into the Kennedy-King assassination. And I never realized that these FBI agents, the most powerful ones in the Bureau, these 8 that were supposed to get me, they didn't know that I know that in 1979, 6 of these 8 would be subpoenaed to testify before Congress. Not because they suspected them, they had either investigated one or both of those murders, and all 6 of them died before they got there. Y'all go on and play your games here. All 6 of them, and the one that you can check out the fastest is William Sullivan, the number 2 man in the FBI, got his subpoena November of '79, but before he came in, he went hunting in New Hampshire, was shot to death. They thought he was a deer. What they didn't tell you, he was shot with a .30-06 with a telescopic sight from only 243 feet away in an open field in the daytime with an orange hunting outfit on. And all I wanted to know is when y'all had the funeral, did you strap him to the hood of the car like you did? Somewhere. And so I say to you tonight, it's rolling out thanks to you. It's a hell of a document here. Little innocent Jack Ruby, little third-rate nightclub owner. He was Jack Rubenstein from Chicago. Hell of a mob cusser. Here's a government exhibit, House Un-American Activity released for Jack Ruby's testimony, United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Washington, D.C. And it reads, it is my sworn statement that one Jack Rubenstein of Chicago, noted as a potential witness for the hearing of the House Un-American Activities, is performing an information function for the staff of Congressman Richard Milhouse Nixon, representative of California. It is requested that Rubenstein not be called to open testimony in this hearing, sworn this Thursday, 24th day of November, 1947. 1947, the Jack Ruby who killed Lee Harvey Oswald is informing to this government, somewhere the game's gonna stop. Somewhere America's gonna find out that this telex, that's the original what it looks like, this telex, dated November the 17th, 1963, during the early morning hours of November the 1763, the teletype machine in the FBI office in New Orleans beginning rattling away. William S. Waters, a young security clerk, walked over to the machine. Waters was alone in the office. His regular working hours was from midnight to 8 a.m. He read the message, which was addressed to SACS, Special Agents in Charge of various offices of the FBI, and he noted that it came from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, J. Edgar Hoover. The message read, urgent, Walter read it carefully. It was headed, "Threat to assassinate President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Dallas, Texas, November the 22nd or 23rd, 1963. Miscellaneous information concerned," and this is a telegram. This is an actual telex that the FBI had 5 days before y'all got to Dallas. Okay, y'all tell me about America. Okay? So y'all go on and play your games. And sit here and read your Chicago Tribunes and your Newsweeks and think everybody else is crazy. One day, Harper's Magazine, you researchers need this copy, front page, Harper's Magazine, paratrooping down in Kuwait. Front page story, seizing Arab oil, the case for U.S. intervention. Why, how, where? What's the date? March 1975, Harper's Magazine did a goddamn front page story, a whole story on what we was going to do in Kuwait, when we was going to do it, and how we was going to do it. 1975, they did that. Where are you, America? I don't play your games. Drink your bourbon. Talk about your family you love. Where are you? Only the AP ran this story, and most papers didn't pick it up. AP New York intelligence analysts and ABC News producers are stunned by a set of 5 Soviet satellite pictures of eastern Kuwait and southern Iraq showing no trace of Iraq military presence, according to the public's report. The photos shot in mid-September by the Soviet commercial satellite was obtained by CBS. They bought them. Shows little or no Iraqi military presence. That's the games they can play. And so I leave you tonight and I say to you, when we get past this, and we haven't got much time, we've got some urgent business. Here's a New York Times story, Sunday, May the 10th. LA police differ sharply with prosecutor on arrest total. Police officials said today that they have arrested 18,213 people from Wednesday night, April the 29th, the day the riots began, through this morning, but the prosecutor said that they cannot account for 10,000 black people that disappeared in them damn riots out there. And nobody's talking about. The New York Times run a story, and nobody at the Times is curious enough to run a follow-up and say, where's those 10,000 people? You arrest 18,000? And I think about my Jewish brothers and sisters whose loved ones was arrested in the middle of the night, and when they went down to the police station in the morning, there was no trace of it, but then we didn't know they was putting them on cattle cars, shipping them out. We don't have much time. And so I leave you tonight and I say to you that not only can you make a difference, you have made a difference. And what is happening here this weekend is very important. I got shot in Watts in 1965. And every morning when I get up and say my prayer and meditation, I look at this scar on my knee. And I remember that before there was a scar, there was a scab. And there's a very interesting thing about a scab. Harvard, Yale, MIT, Howard University can't make a scab. We got scientists that can make surface-to-air missiles. We got scientists that can put rockets together to go from one planet to another. We can make bombs to blow up the whole planet, but we haven't found nobody can make a scab. And next time you get a scab, look at it. I don't care how white you are, the scab is always darker than you. And I don't care how black you are, the scab is always blacker than you. But one thing you know when you see that scab, there's a God force underneath that that's healing and getting rid of the infection. And after it's all gone and all healed, then you get a scar. So when I look at this scar on my leg, I know God took care of business. And that's the problem with America. Every child is told by adults, whatever you do, don't pull off the scab. And that's all that's wrong with America. We keep pulling off the scab. That's what happened in Dallas. Scab was pulled off. That's what we just looked at. In California, the scab was pulled off. That's what we look at when we look at the CIA and the FBI and that radical group that run crazy and think they're above the law and God. Them is scab pullers, but it's not going to work. And I can say to you tonight, you will know when America will be saved when we can look around and see the scab healed and turned into a scar. We pulled the scab off with our Jewish brothers and sisters, with our Irish Catholic brothers and sisters, with our Italian brothers and sisters, with every group that came over here. The scab has been pulled off. And if we are not willing to say to the women in America and to everybody in this country, the Asians and everybody, it's going to be a little pain for us to do this because but we're going to let the scab alone and see where we go. So I'll leave you tonight and I say to you that I'm the problem. I have 10 children. Never once when I think about God bless me so I could create new life 10 times. There was no white folks that could stop me. There was no army. There was no money. I didn't have to get permission from nobody to create life 10 times. And yet, not once did I have an affair with my wife to create God's new life. I was just having fun. And as I leave you, I want you to think about, I never owned a car that I didn't know the year, the make, the model, the down payment, the insurance, the monthly notes, and the trade-in. And when I have to look my God in the face and look me in the face and realize I put more planning into owning a damn car than creating God's new life, then maybe the wrench out have to start here. And so I leave you and I say to you, you have made a difference. And we have made a difference. And I just want to say to you that I love you. Thank God that you've been able to withstand it and do what you've been able to do. And I think about my brother in that wheelchair that could have sit back and just did nothing, was out there in the front line. When I think about all of you up here, when I think about all of us that would be here tonight, but they're somewhere in mental hospitals, crazy or dead or walking around talking to themselves. And I say to you, God has blessed us, and I pray that God continuously to bless us, and we can make this work. I love you. God bless you. Peace be with you. Thank you.
Welcome to the Midwest Symposium on the assassination of John F. Kennedy, organized by Douglas Carlson for the third decade of research organization for the John F. Kennedy assassination. I think you know that our program this morning consists of the movie and the media, Jane Rusconi, Jerry Policoff, the photographic evidence and the RFK inquest, Robert Groden, Freedom of Information Act and the Assassination Files, Jim Lazar, and the 1992 JFK hearings and the MLK inquest with John Judge. We did receive a letter from Jerry Rose. I just want to quote about 5 lines. I regret that extremely compelling family circumstances will prevent my attendance at next weekend's Chicago Symposium of the third decade. My thoughts will certainly be with you those days, even though my body will be in southern Oklahoma. Congratulations on the excellent work you've done in preparing for this conference. I'll be excerpting from that later in the program. We have received so far, I think, excellent coverage. Several of our speakers were on for 3 hours on the Ed Schwartz show, WLUP, last night. An article in the Chicago Sun-Times, Saturday, June 27th, 1992, by Larry Weintraub, staff writer, in the Metro section, page 4, an objective presentation of our press conference, and we were on 2 evening channels with what were called by many people who saw them effective sound bites. I'm going to introduce both Jane Rusconi and Jerry Policoff together, and they will make a presentation in tandem and together, and then we'll go to questions. Jane Rusconi worked as the research coordinator on Oliver Stone's JFK film. She's a 1988 graduate of Yale University. She received her bachelor's in philosophy and psychology. What did a research coordinator do? Well, as she said in a recent interview, well, everything, really. Working on, with Stone and the technical advisors, researchers, and historians, locating photos, film, and other information, checking on accuracy of locations. The full interview, it seems to me, is an important one, and it's in the, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the summer edition of Cineast. Jerry Policoff, assassination researcher and media critic, sales manager for a Fox network TV station in Cincinnati since 1966, researching in and writing on the JFK assassination and specializing in the media and the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Has published in New Times, New York Times, Washington Star, Rolling Stone, The Realist, and The Village Voice. I'm George Michael Ivica, your host and moderator. Is Jane Rusconi and Jerry Policoff.
I hope so. In case you don't know which is which, I'm Jerry and this is Jane. Jane's going to talk at length about the reaction to JFK, the movie, and I'm sure that the press coverage that related to that movie is no surprise to anybody in this room, but it didn't start in 1992. I'd like to start by reading a couple of paragraphs from a book called Conspiracy by Anthony Summers. Anthony Summers is an award-winning journalist formerly with the BBC who wrote extensively about the Kennedy assassination, began his work working for a BBC project, a documentary on the assassination, and he wrote in Conspiracy, "The American press, to its discredit, has generally played down the achievements of the Assassinations Committee or brushed its conclusions aside. This lethargy may stem in part from the fact that 16 years ago, there was no serious attempt at investigative reporting of the Kennedy assassination. Ever since, editors have been content to denigrate the efforts of those citizens who threw doubt on the original findings. In some cases, they were right. However, a massive and sober congressional inquiry has vindicated the serious researchers. The press should now be prepared, at the very least, to treat the case seriously. For more than 2 years, I immersed myself in the massive documentation of the Kennedy case and traveled widely to question a great number of witnesses. This was an opportunity denied to many students of the case who must rely on scholarly research alone. It is, I suppose, a further comment on press performance that I know of no professional colleague who has ever been assigned to delve so deeply or so long into the case." That really says a lot in terms of a nutshell to describe what the case is all about and what the press coverage of the case is all about. The press coverage began almost from the beginning with coverage like this. November 24th, 1963, New York Post, assassin named. That was fairly typical of what we saw in the media in the early days after the assassination. The media was, we know a lot of cases where the media doesn't get accolades for its coverage, but in the Kennedy assassination, it's not a case of passively just accepting handouts. The media in this controversy was really an active collaborator with the government in terms of passing a cover story along to the American public. The most important evidence, or probably one of the most important pieces of evidence in the Kennedy assassination, is the Zapruder film. It's unthinkable that this incredible piece of information, a film showing the murder of the President of the United States, would come into the possession of anybody but a law enforcement body investigating the assassination. That's not what happened. On November 24th, 1963, Dick Stoley of Life magazine purchased the print rights to the Zapruder film, from Abraham Zapruder, who was a Dallas dress manufacturer who had witnessed the assassination. He hurried back to New York to show the film to the various Life executives, or Time Inc. executives. One of the Time Inc. executives present at that session was C.D. Jackson. C.D. Jackson had been the head of psychological warfare under President Eisenhower. He had once been described by Drew Pearson as the person at Time Inc. who was always busy putting out fires for the CIA. He had once been the person that Henry Luce, the founder of the Time Inc. empire, had planned to groom to be president of the United States. C.D. Jackson's reaction when he saw the Zapruder film was to send Stoley back to Dallas so that Time Inc. could purchase not only print rights, but complete rights to the Zapruder film. Stoley wrote about that 10 years later in Esquire, and he quoted C.D. Jackson as saying that it was necessary to get complete rights to the Zapruder film so that it could be withheld from the public, at least until public emotions had subsided. As Tony Summers also remarked, if the Zapruder film had been shown to the American public the week of the assassination, the American public never would have swallowed the notion that Lee Harvey Oswald had been the lone assassin. I'm sure everybody in this room has seen the Zapruder film, but for those of you that haven't, I mean, the most dramatic thing on it, there are many dramatic things on the film, but the most dramatic thing about the film is that it shows President Kennedy being hit by the fatal shot at frame 313, and his head is rocketed violently backward. Incidentally, Dan Rather also saw the Zapruder film on November 24th, 1963, and got on national television and described the film as clearly showing the president's head being driven violently forward. The first description the American public ever received of the Zapruder film. And remember, it was many, many years, it was 12 years to be exact, before the American public ever was able to get an opportunity to see the Zapruder film. And the fact that it was suppressed for 12 years really made the cover-up possible. On December 6th, 1963, the December 6th issue of Life magazine had an article dealing with the rumors that there might have been a conspiracy. I've got a lot of material here. I am going to apologize up front for being a little disorganized because there's a lot to find on this table. But please bear with me as I fumble around occasionally. End to Nagging Rumors, the 6 Critical Seconds. It was an article by a Life magazine reporter named Paul Mandel. There were rumors that the president had been shot from the front. The doctors at Parkland Hospital, we all know about Dr. Crenshaw, who has recently come out and talked about his impressions that the shots had come from the front. That's nothing new, really. That's what all the doctors at Parkland Hospital said in November of 1963. They talked about a wound in the front of the president's throat. Mr. Mandel, in describing the Zapruder film, which only Time Inc. had access to, remember, solved that problem very easily, solved it for the American public. Halfway down in the middle column. Okay. The description of the president's 2 wounds by a Dallas doctor who tried to save him have added to the rumors. The doctor said 1 bullet passed from back to front on the right side of the president's head, but the other, the doctor reported, entered the president's throat from the front and then lodged in his body. Remember, this was before the single bullet theory was developed, and the single bullet theory was developed because the government found they had difficulty with the timing of the shots, as established in the Zapruder film. Since by this time the limousine was 50 yards past Oswald and the president's back was turned almost directly to the sniper, it has been hard to understand how the bullet could enter the front of his throat. Hence the recurring guess that there was a second sniper somewhere else. But the 8mm film shows the president turning his body far around to the right as he waves to someone in the crowd. His throat is exposed toward the sniper's nest just before he clutches it. Is there anybody in this room that hasn't seen the Zapruder film? Has anybody ever seen John Kennedy turning around to wave to somebody in the crowd? Maybe Lee Harvey Oswald?
Probably to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Here I am.
6'1".
This was the role the media played, and it wasn't an isolated example. The New York Times, on I believe it was November 24th, front page article, evidence against Oswald described as conclusive. It's interesting to look at what was going on behind the scenes, because there really was a very careful choreography going on. On November 24th, J. Edgar Hoover wrote a memo to Walter Jenkins at the White House. The thing I am most concerned about, and so is Mr. Katzenbach, Nicholas Katzenbach, is having something issued so we can convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin. On November 25th, 1963, the White House learned that the Washington Post was planning to run an editorial calling for an independent investigation of the assassination. At the time, of course, J. Edgar Hoover had already declared Oswald as the lone assassin, and J. Edgar Hoover wanted the FBI to have sole responsibility for the investigation. The White House was very interested, or was very anxious to keep J. Edgar Hoover happy, and the last thing they wanted was to have the media running around calling for independent investigations. Nicholas Katzenbach made a telephone call to J. Russell Wiggins, who was then the editor of the Washington Post, and basically implored him not to do this foul deed of running an editorial. The FBI stepped in. J. Edgar Hoover wrote a memo later in the day on November 25th, 1963, and he boasted, quote, "I called Mr. Jenkins at the White House and advised him that we had killed the editorial in the Post." On November 25th, 1963, again, remember this is 2 days after the assassination, there was a memo written from Nicholas Katzenbach to Bill Moyers, who was then the appointment secretary to Lyndon Johnson. It is important that all of the facts surrounding the President Kennedy's assassination be made public in a way which will satisfy people in the United States and abroad that all of the facts have been told, and that a statement to this effect is made now. The public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large, and that the evidence was such that he would have been convicted at trial. Speculation about Oswald's motivations ought to be cut off, and we should have some basis for rebutting thought that this was a communist conspiracy, as the Iron Curtain Press is saying, a right-wing conspiracy to blame it on the communists. Unfortunately, the facts on Oswald seem too pat, too obvious. Marxist, Cuba, Russian wife, etc. The Dallas police have put out statements. There clearly was a plan at that point. Everything was in play. It was a carefully choreographed scenario, and the press bought it. James Reston, we know now that James Reston, almost immediately after the assassination, got a call from Lyndon Johnson expressing certain things. James Reston at the time didn't reveal the phone call, but he wrote in the New York Times on November 26, 1963, one of the things President Johnson is said to be concerned about is that the pro-communist background of Lee Oswald, the man who was accused by the Dallas police of assassinating President Kennedy, may lead in some places to another communist hunt that will divide the country and complicate the new president's relations with Moscow. Again, on December 9th, Deputy Attorney General Katzenbach transmitted a report to the FBI. The Commission should consider releasing or allowing the Department of Justice to release a short press statement which would briefly assure the public that the FBI had turned up no evidence of conspiracy, etc. So basically, from the beginning, J. Edgar Hoover declared that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin, and the press was carefully nurtured, and the press went along, lock, stock, and barrel. Immediately after the FBI report was released, which I believe was December 12th or 13th of 1963, NBC ran a documentary dealing with the findings of the FBI report. On December 11th, there was a memo written, an FBI document written, that advised NBC's policy will be to televise only those items which are in consonance with the Bureau's report. name of the source was blacked out, felt the film would be available for viewing and copying in New York. He advised that all info in possession of NBC is at the disposal of the FBI, but requested specific areas be ascertained. The FBI knew exactly what that NBC documentary was going to say before it ever aired. They also were assured that nothing in it would be offensive to J. Edgar Hoover or his fellow agents at the FBI.
That's the search part documentary.
No, this was a 1-hour documentary, and I'll be getting into that. It was a 4-part documentary. That was CBS. This was a documentary immediately following. This was in early 1964, talking about the FBI rushed out with its findings. Actually, this was the result of the Katzenbach memo that said, let's get a statement out right away saying there was no conspiracy. If the media had done its job, it would have been very difficult for the government to have ever to have ever sold the single assassin theory to the American public. But the media didn't do its job. I mean, here was it's February 21st, 1964, Life magazine. Lee Harvey Oswald, the famous picture on the cover. Life magazine also stole or received stolen property. Lee Harvey Oswald's diary. It was basically a little cabal between a reporter by the name of Hugh Ainsworth and Bill Alexander, who was with the district attorney's office in Dallas. I guess this might be a good time to talk a little about Hugh Ainsworth. Hugh Ainsworth, to this day, I believe, he's now works for the Washington Times. To this day, Hugh Ainsworth is a vocal defender of the Warren Report. He covered, he worked for the Dallas Morning News. He later worked for Newsweek. He covered the Garrison investigation for Newsweek. Wrote an early article that was very, very critical of the Garrison investigation. And he sent a copy of that article to George Christian, who was at the time Lyndon Johnson's press secretary. And what the letter says is, here's a rough draft. This letter later turned up in the LBJ library, by the way. Here's a rough draft of the story we discussed this morning. It'll be changed in a minor way, but for the most part will be just this. The story will break late Sunday via the wire services. Naturally, the strength and seriousness of it will evoke considerable reaction. I thought the President might be interested in this advanced version. I am not offering this for comment of any kind or a check of the validity of any part. Simply, it's FYI. Naturally, I would expect this to go no further. Or to end up in the LBJ library. My interest is in informing governmental officials of each step along the way. My interest in informing government officials of each step along the way is because of my intimate knowledge of what Jim Garrison is planning. The subpoena of 2 FBI agents Saturday today is another step in this plan to make it seem that the FBI and CIA are involved in the JFK, quote, plot, unquote. He is hell-bent on involving several high officials, is considering embarrassing others. In his devious scheme, he can and probably will do untold damage to this nation's image throughout the world. I am well aware that Garrison wants the government to defy him in some manner or to step in to pressure a halt in his, quote, probe, unquote. But of course, this should not happen, for that is exactly what Garrison wants. I intend to make a complete report of my knowledge available to the FBI, as I have done in the past.
Ainsworth says that people have taken that letter out of context. I don't know what he means by that. It seems to make its context pretty clear. Excuse me?
What? It really, you know, when you talk about Time Inc., I guess it's pretty interesting. Number one, there was a great deal of disinformation coming out of Miami and coming out of the anti-Castro Cuban community in the days immediately following the assassination. One of the people that was intimately involved in disseminating those stories was Claire Booth Luce, the wife of Henry Luce. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I got to sleep late last night. There was a really interesting statement by Claire Booth Luce in Skeptic in September, October 1975. Remember, this is a major news organization responsible for disseminating news to the American public. She wrote, "If the objective were to show that the CIA was in on it, that is the most awful rubbish. it would wind up without having allayed the suspicions of people who were determined to be suspicious. There could have been no reason to conceal anything about the assassination unless it was thought that foreign conspirators were involved, say Mexicans or Cubans, knowledge of which might have started a war. That is the only possible reason for concealing anything. Ultimately, nothing but harm will come from digging into it, since the truth has probably already been told. That may explain why we had things like the October 2nd, 1964 issue of Life magazine. Remember, again, this Life magazine had the exclusive access to the Zapruder film. There are numerous changes that occurred. First of all, I've been told, and I'm not an expert in magazine layout or anything else, but today, breaking a plate and resetting it is something that a computer can do in a few minutes and probably costs about $15. In 1964, it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. This issue of Life magazine was changed not once but twice. I mean, this was probably a matter of $700,000 or $800,000 in 1964 dollars. There were numerous frames of the Zapruder film published in this issue of Life. This was the key one. This was the original edition of the magazine. You can see that the president's head is exploding at frame 313. And the caption describing that frame. And by the way, there were numerous changes in this issue, changes in copy that made the case for the lone assassin more clearly as the issue went on, but I think this is the most important. The direction from which shots came was established by this picture. I'm sorry, I started with the third edition. First edition. You can see that the frame in this picture is, I believe, frame 323, which shows the president approximately a half a second after the fatal shot has been fired against the back of the seat. And the caption says, "The assassin's shot struck the right rear portion of the president's skull, causing a massive wound and snapping his head to one side." Well, you can see which side his head was snapped to, and if you know anything about the layout of Dealey Plaza, one would read this and say, hey, you know, how could that shot have come from the depository? So we had a change.
It's a different color.
Oh, I'm sorry. We had a change. And the next edition, different photograph. We now have frame 313. Caption is the same. Frame 313. Sorry, I'm getting my issues. The frame was changed, the caption remained exactly the same. And then a third issue. Again, frame 313. This time, the direction from which the shots came was established by this picture. Taking an instant bullet struck the rear of President Kennedy's head, and passing through caused the front part of his skull to explode forward. Remember, nobody but Time Inc. could talk about what the Zapruder film showed. This was, we hear about the media saying that Oliver Stone was involved in rewriting history. The NBC documentary. Well, I guess I think this is an appropriate time to talk about the CBS documentary. Back in 1966, up until about the middle of 1966, there was no dissent about the Warren Commission, nothing that would be published in the media. There had been a couple of books. There was a book called Who Killed Kennedy by Thomas Buchanan that became a bestseller in Europe. It was published here. Harold Weisberg wrote Whitewash, which was published in 1965. It's really a remarkable book when you consider how early it was written. but there really wasn't any mainstream discussion about the controversy of the assassination. Then in 1966, Whitewash, which had been privately published, was commercially published by Dell. Edward Epstein came out with Inquest. Inquest was from a mainstream publisher, Viking Press. It was had a foreword by Revelo Oliver, was it? Richard H. Revere. All of a sudden, it became acceptable to challenge the Warren Commission. The New York Times came out with an editorial saying there was now room for reasonable doubt. Life magazine, probably one of the most amazing developments. Life magazine came out with a cover story. They analyzed the Zapruder film. This, by the way, was part of an investigation that time had begun. They had put a team together to basically look into the areas of the investigation. This was the first, or the assassination, this was the first issue. It was supposed to be one of many, but they called for a new investigation based on some of the troubling aspects of the Zapruder film. Interestingly enough, in that same week, Time magazine had an article attacking the phantasmagoria, attacking the critics, attacking the notion that there could have been a conspiracy. And about a week later, Hedley Donovan, who is the publisher of both Time magazine and Life magazine, was asked by Newsweek, was asked by the New York Times how he felt about his two magazines taking totally opposite opinions of this issue, and he basically said that that was unfortunate, and he thought that in due time they would have the same opinion once again. And it didn't take very long because the investigation was abruptly dismantled. I was told by one of the members of that team that, and he would never tell me who it was that told him this, but I believe the exact quote was, "It is not Time's function to investigate the Kennedy assassination." There never really was another issue of Life magazine or Time magazine that questioned the assassination. There were many that once again launched on a mighty defense of the Warren Report. But by 1966, with Life magazine doing things like this, with the Saturday Evening Post in 1967 putting Josiah Thompson's 6 Seconds in Dallas on its cover, with the New York Times calling for an investigation, there really was, there was a mass movement. Congressman Kupferman, Congressman Fitzryan of New York had called for a reopening of the case in Congress. There was a lot of momentum. Along came CBS. CBS announced that they were going to do a 4-part study of the Kennedy assassination. That ran in June 25th, 26th, 27th, and 28th of 1967. I've personally never seen anything more dishonest on network television. There were, by the way, some dissenters within CBS that were very, very upset about some of the things that happened during the course of the CBS investigation, and some of them have spoken rather freely about it.
Anyone prominent?
Well, one of them was Robert Richter, who later found trouble getting work, and his most recent contribution was the Nova documentary that ran a few years ago, which basically gave Walter Cronkite an opportunity to say once again that the Warren Commission was right, and to basically reaffirm some of the things CBS had done. Interestingly enough, I interviewed Richter for an article in New Times Magazine that ran in 1975. He told me, I believe the exact quote was, one could take these, it was very close, one could have taken different segments from the same interviews. One could have analyzed the experiments that we did in a more objective manner and come out with findings that were totally opposite than the findings we put on the air. Before that article went to press, I called Robert Richter. He was a friend. I didn't want to hurt him. I read the segments of the article that dealt with my interview with him. I asked him if he had any problem with any of it. He said, absolutely not. That's what happened. That's what I said. After the article was published, he wrote a letter to New Times saying that he had never said that. I called him. I said, Robert, I don't understand. I read you this quote. I mean, How can you write a letter like that? Incidentally, Richter and I had been in a panel together at NYU in 1974, where he said basically the same thing. And by the way, somebody from New Times had been there, so they didn't take his letter very seriously. But he basically told me that he didn't remember saying those things, and he wasn't very comfortable on the phone. But he then proceeded to tell me that after the article had been published, he received a phone call from Les Midgley, who was the executive producer of the 4-part CBS series. And the gist of what I gathered Midgley said to him was, "You son of a bitch, you'll never work again." And I think that might have had something to do with the letter he wrote to New Times, which New Times never published, and rightfully so. But some of the things that CBS did in the process of that documentary, they gathered 11 marksmen, master marksmen, from around the country, and gave them a rifle similar to Oswald's. There was one problem with it. You may know that the FBI had determined that if you just didn't aim but just dry fired the alleged assassination rifle as quickly as it could be fired, it couldn't get off 2 shots in less than 4.6 seconds. That was physically the fastest that the gun could be fired. The weapon that CBS came up with was the best time that anybody had was 4.1 seconds, so they had a faster rifle. That's a problem right away. They never mentioned on the air they had a faster rifle, but they had a faster rifle. They did let the gunman, the marksman, test fire the rifle. That's an opportunity that we know Lee Harvey Oswald never could have had. Not one of the marksmen that CBS hired was able to duplicate Oswald's feats. And Walter Cronkite got up on national television and said that, of course, it would have been very difficult. It was very unlikely that Oswald, under normal circumstances, could have fired the gun fast enough. But, and this is a direct quote, "But these were not normal circumstances. Oswald was shooting at a president." It got better. CBS decided, well, maybe Oswald had more time, because they gathered, I believe, 8 Bell and Howell movie cameras, timed them, and found that some of them ran more slowly than the Zapruder camera did. Therefore, they said, well, maybe Zapruder's camera was running more slowly, and maybe, therefore, Oswald had more time. I've come into possession of 11 internal CBS documents that were generated while the research was being done for that film. And in one of the documents, Richard Salant, who at the time was president of CBS News, made a comment about that particular feature that was being planned, and basically said, this is nonsense. The FBI timed the camera. Bell and Howell timed the camera. It was 18.3 frames a second. How can we get on the air and say maybe it was running at a different speed because we found another camera that was running at a different speed? So they weren't too naive at CBS. They knew what they could say and what they couldn't say, but when the documentary went on the air, guess what? They talked about the famous Zapruder camera, and they said it could have been running more slowly because they found other cameras that were running more slowly. They decided to test whether the single bullet theory was possible. They hired the same expert that the Warren Commission had used, a veterinarian, by the way, and had him fire shots through blocks of gelatin that simulated tissue, through a slab of masonite, I believe, that simulated bone. They neglected to simulate John Connally's rib. The Zapruder film, we're told, entered Kennedy's back or his neck, exited his throat, hit Connally in the back, shattering his 5th rib, exiting from his chest just below the nipple, went through his wrist, shattering the radius bone, which is one of the thickest bones in the body, and then lodging in his thigh where it later fell out, and we know it was found in pristine condition in Parkland Hospital. The tests that CBS did, they neglected to simulate the rib, which was rather important. It's a any piece of bone, a small piece of bone, will have a great impact on slowing down the velocity of a bullet. None of the bullets that CBS fired during these numerous tests managed to make it into the slab that simulated Connolly's thigh. None of them made it that far. But as CBS said, it would have required only slightly greater velocity to have done so, and therefore they decided that their tests proved that the single bullet theory was possible. One of the things they never did show, and I don't know myself what the result was, only I suspect that it wasn't something that would have, I don't believe it was an oversight on CBS's part. CBS never did show us the bullets that they fired through those blocks of gelatin and through those slabs of masonite. I'm sure had they been pristine and had they looked anything like the famous magic bullet, Exhibit 399, they would have displayed it prominently. Now, they later, in response to inquiries, said that that was a mere oversight and the bullet was not deformed. I would like to see CBS produce that bullet. Incidentally, CBS probably has, we talk about freeing up the documents in the of the House Assassinations Committee and freeing up the the CIA documents. CBS probably interviewed almost as many witnesses as the Warren Commission did. They launched a massive investigation of their own immediately after the assassination. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses. They have an incredible, must be a vault full of interviews, tests they've done. They've never allowed any of that material to be independently analyzed. They did allow a filmmaker, they sold the rights to their outtakes to Emile D'Antonio for a film he was making. He bought those rights for $50,000, and 3 hours into viewing the material, they changed their mind and basically ushered him out of their vaults. He did hold a press conference and say that in those 3 hours he saw significant material that contradicted the findings of the Warren Commission and contradicted the stance that CBS had always taken publicly. One of the interesting things that we found recently, I just recently co-authored a piece in the Village Voice on the role of the media, and we interviewed the daughter of Orville Nix, or the granddaughter, I'm sorry, of Orville Nix, who Orville Nix took a very important motion picture film from the other side of the street, from where Abraham Zapruder was standing. He was interviewed by CBS, and in the CBS documentary, he talked about how many shots. Bam, 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 3. Where did the shots come from? The book depository. His granddaughter was there that day, and she told us a little more about that. Bernie Birnbaum, the CBS producer who was supervising the interview of witnesses that day, asked Mr. Nix, where did the shots come from? Well, over there on that hill behind that fence. Cut. Let's try this again. Mr. Nix, where did the shots come from? Over there on the, that hill up there on the knoll up there. Cut. That took place several times. Finally, Mr. Birnbaum got rather agitated and said, Mr. Nix, where did the Warren Commission say the shots came from? And he said, well, depository. He said, well, that's what you're supposed to say. His granddaughter also vividly remembered his describing the shots. We remember on the air it was bam, bam, bam. I guess they ran out of film because what he said was bam, 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 bam. That day riding home in the car, his granddaughter described how he kept pounding on the steering wheel and he was just angry, he was irate. And he said, why are they trying to make me think I'm insane? We now know something else about that CBS documentary. I mentioned that I found some internal CBS documents. One of the people that is carboned on all of these documents is Richard Salant's administrative assistant. Her name was Ellen McCloy. If that last name rings a bell, you may remember John J. McCloy, who was a member of the Warren Commission, had also been head of the World Bank, had been a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, was sometimes referred to euphemistically as the chairman of the board of the United States of America. He had a daughter named Ellen, and she was an administrative assistant to Richard Salant. She was copied on virtually all of the documents. I don't know if she was copied on every document that was generated, but she was copied on all of the documents that I came in contact with, and I have 11 of them. It seems that Ellen would pass these documents on to her father, and her father would then pass her notes back. And there are a lot of interesting things in these documents, including Salant questioning, challenging the speed of the Zapruder film. But these are handwritten notes by Ellen McCloy to Les Midgley. One comment that Dad made after reading the rough script, there are several comments in here. Dad said, Dad asked me to give you the enclosed. He said it shouldn't be considered as a bribe. Maybe it's just a gift as a result of the birth of Lucy's baby. The old man thanks you very much for the booklet. There's also a letter here. I hope I can find it. It's not really that important, but there's a letter here from Les Midgley to John J. McCloy, thanking him for all his help, mentioning that, as you know, another member of your family worked very hard on this project. In other words, there was a rather interesting consultant working behind the scenes on the CBS documentary, John J. McCloy. We never learned that on the air. As recently as 6 months ago on CBS, 48 Hours, Dan Rather ran a 1-hour special. CBS these days doesn't have the dollars to invest that they had to invest in 1967 and 1975. They really can't go out and spend millions of dollars investigating the rerunning tests, interviewing witnesses, but Dan Rather made it, I'm sorry?
They spend it on Rather's salary instead.
Right. Dan Rather made it very clear that he thought that the CBS documentaries in 1967 and 1975 were among the proudest moments of his life, and that they still stood as examples of shining journalism. And to this day, I'm sorry? Yes.
But what he doesn't tell you is when they were taping interviews for that 48 Hours, he interviewed Bob Tannenbaum, who, as you know, was one time the deputy counsel for the HSCA. And Tannenbaum is a very big, imposing person, and he said to Dan Rather, he said, well, why do you bother? Why do you keep doing this? What are you doing here? And I think he was a little threatening about it. And Rather said to him, well, I feel really bad about it because I screwed up the story in the beginning. And he said, someday I'm going to get it right.
Let's hope so.
We're still waiting.
He's very upset to this day, by the way. There are bootleg copies of the Zapruder film going around.
With his narration.
With his narration, where basically a sequence has been filmed over and over again, and it basically goes, and the Zapruder film clearly shows the president's head being driven violently forward. Violently forward. Violently forward. I was fortunate enough to encounter Dan Rather at I was working at a television station that hosted him when he spoke at Trinity College in San Antonio. And so I had access to a private reception for him afterwards. And I guess I wasn't being a very charming host to ambush him and ask him about his statements back in 1963, but he told me he was very glad that I'd asked him that question, and he was very indignant about what had been done with his narration, and he basically said that the film went by very quickly, and it was he refused to characterize it as a mistake. It probably wasn't a mistake. It was a natural error that in the heat of the moment and with the speed that the film was going by, anybody could have made the same. I don't remember how he characterized it. He wouldn't use the word mistake. I don't know if anybody could, I can't say how anybody could ever look at the Zapruder film and see his head being driven violently forward. I mean, it's the most stunning piece of footage I've ever seen, and I'm sorry, yeah.
Looked at on their editor
that shouldn't have made a difference. Personally, what I think happened is other people in Rather's office watched the film a few more times than he did, because he had very extensive notes for one viewing of it. So I think people wrote him notes, gave it to him, and he read them. And I don't know where the screw-up came from, but Dan Rather isn't exactly one to say I was wrong, so he stuck to that position until it was proven that he was wrong. I don't think, his notes were far too extensive for one viewing, so I think he was relying on other people's material.
This is an interesting memo. This is a memo that William Colby, then director of the CIA, wrote on September 6, 1975, as Dan Rather and Les Midgley, the daring duo, were preparing to do it again. From their attitude, I believe there is a chance that the program will indicate that there is no CIA connection with Oswald beyond that noted above. This could make a contribution to knocking down the paranoid belief to the contrary. We must, however, ensure that Mr. Rather does not learn anything which could cause the slightest doubt on the above account before he produces the program in November.
Before you begin now shouting out things, and we have to do it twice, let Jane talk some on the JFK film. We'll take commentary and questions, and I'll be able to get a mic to you, and therefore we'll have you on mic, and everyone will hear the question, and it'll also be recorded, all right? So hold back your questions for just a little bit, because we want to hear about the JFK film and the attempt to assassinate JFK for a second time.
I'm assuming that this audience followed the controversy in the press, which started about 2 weeks after we started shooting. We got a call one day saying that a man named George Lardner from the Washington Post was going to be in Dealey Plaza, and he wanted to do a story. And we thought about it, and we thought it was best if we went about our business making the movie and didn't talk to Lardner. And we found out that might have been a big mistake. His article was not exactly favorable. But we did get space to respond. That was a big fight, too. We had to threaten to sue the paper. That was a real learning experience for us. We learned that not only did we have to keep an eye on the press for the distortions they make, but we also had to be extra tough on ourselves and not let anything get by us that could be attacked by anyone. It didn't change, of course, when the film came out. Before it came out, even, we were denounced by former presidents like Gerald Ford. Richard Nixon denounced the movie. The current president, George Bush, called his favorite DJ, Rush Limbaugh, and denounced the film. That was our beginning. We started replying to everybody and anybody. I think we wrote letters in about 5 different languages. We didn't just respond to articles in this country, but we went all out all over the world. Anyway, we collected most of the debate and most of our research in this book. It's called JFK, the Documented Screenplay. And it features a whole script with research notes and then about 100 articles, both attacking and for the film. I'm willing to bet most of them are attacking it even. But this is, the reason we did this, we didn't have to do it, and we didn't do it to conquer the publishing world. Our reason for doing it was we wanted to be accountable for what we put on the screen. We felt a strong responsibility there, especially when people said, well, that never happened. Some of the things that people said never happened were very basic. You know, for example, they said Garrison never gave the closing argument in the courtroom. Well, he did. The text of it was in American Grotesque. It's also in the court transcripts. And we actually included the whole thing in here. But we didn't want to detract from the truth. We didn't want to see the truth of the movie be forgotten behind all that, so we put this out. And I'd urge everybody to take a look at it, if nothing else, just to see exactly what we did. What was interesting, though, is while we were attacked a lot on the op-ed pages, the film reviews were largely positive. The one thing we did notice is that most reviewers lacked the confidence to endorse the movie all the way. They would write at length about the good things about the movie, how wonderful it looked, the good acting, the wonderful editing. the good camera used. And then they would say, but a lot of it's fiction. They would never say what was fiction because really they didn't know. But they felt they had to say that because on the op-ed pages, people like Gerald Ford were saying so, not that he had seen the movie. Occasionally, out of the blue, we would find a great review that we didn't expect. This one came from Joanna Connors. She's the film critic for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and she wrapped up her review by saying, she quotes from the movie, "It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma," Pesci's David Ferry says. Oliver Stone won't change that, but he's done something almost as important. He's reopened the forum and upped the ante on both American politics and American movies. What a way to serve your country.
Great statement.
Yeah, we thought that was really great. And really, she said right there, we never, Oliver and Warner Brothers, we do know most of the film critics in the country, and when they pull quotes to put on ads, what goes into that is really amazing. You literally have the critic calling you, offering quotes. Joanna Connors is not one of those critics. We didn't know her. Yet she really summarized well what we were trying to do, which was reopening the forum and getting people to debate the issues. And we certainly did that. Other papers weren't so generous. The New York Times ran about 36 articles. 2 of them were not negative. Not that they were positive, they just weren't negative. That doesn't include the 2 letters we wrote. The most bothersome article of all came out about 5 days after the movie opened, on December 24th. And it was called, the title is Hollywood Questions Studio's Role in JFK. And they ran a long article saying that Warner Brothers should have been a lot more responsible in allowing this movie to get made. They went around and talked to other studio heads in Los Angeles, and they found that they actually defended the movie. Don Steele, who was the former president of Columbia Pictures, said a movie can't be judged by the same standards that journalists judge a newspaper story. It's Oliver Stone's vision. It's called freedom of speech. Well, the New York Times also takes that freedom of speech on their editorial pages. And this is their vision. This is an editorial that appeared on January 7th, 1979. And it's in response to the acoustics findings that there was more than one gunman firing at Kennedy. Anyway, they detail the House findings, saying, they quote, he was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, and they find that a problem. I'll read from the article. What then is so troubling about the committee's assertion of probable conspiracy? The problem is the word. It's technically correct. If there were 2 gunmen, then either 2 independent assassins pulled the triggers in the self-same second, an incredible coincidence, or there was, indeed, a, quote, conspiracy. But as students of assassination learn quickly, conspiracy means much more to the lay public. The word is freighted with dark connotations of malevolence perpetrated by enemies, foreign or political. Yet 2 maniacs instead of 1 might be more like it. So this is the 2 lone nut theory. That's the New York Times vision. They complain that the word conspiracy is freighted, this is quoting again, freighted with dark connotations of malevolence. Murdering a president is a pretty malevolent act. They're right about that.
Yeah, I think I counted 24 articles in the New York Times in the first 30 days after the movie came out. It was amazing.
They couldn't, they ran 2 actually, well, 2 in response to the movie. The second one they ran, the first one was a Brent Staples one, which just, it was pretty crazy. The next one took a little saner approach, and it says Oliver Stone, who directed the $40 million movie, JFK, they like to attach the price tag to it as if that gives it some sort of darker scope, bigger propaganda. Oliver Stone, who directed the $40 million movie JFK, is not engaged in a fair-minded inquiry. He continues to libel Clay Shaw, a New Orleans businessman who was acquitted of conspiring to kill the president. Now, if you've seen JFK, we didn't change the verdict, nor do we say that Shaw was guilty in any way, and we don't even feel he was. But they say we continue to libel him. A few weeks before that, they ran an article called Soviets, the headline was Soviets to cut foreign spy staff by 50%. And one of the subsections of the article was about Lee Harvey Oswald. And it says, the KGB found extensive records on the activities of Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. That's libel. You can't really libel a dead person, but you can't call somebody an assassin if they've never been convicted. We wrote them a letter about that. They wouldn't publish the letter until we threatened to buy the page as an ad. We had the ad laid out, we sent it to them, then they said, well, we'll run your letter. But 2 days before the letter ran, they ran a picture of Gary Oldman as Oswald in their arts and leisure section. And it says, the caption of the picture says, in JFK, Gary Oldman had to imitate the peculiar speech of the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, we like to think we made that change happen, and we had hoped that that happens in the future. That does show that you can educate the press. We could all give up on the American media in general. This is what I think gives us hope. This is the sports section. When you write about sports, you can't take the same liberties as when you write about political things. You can't change the outcome of games. You can't change the scores. They have pages of supporting evidence, statistics, numbers, everything, and breakdowns, specific things. If only the political section could be that clear on things.
Excellent point. That was good.
The Oscars also gave the New York Times some problems. They were afraid we were going to win. So the day the Oscar ballots, about a week before the Oscar ballots went out, they had a piece from David Bellin talking about how we did this horrible thing, and for this, the film has received 8 Academy Award nominations. Well, maybe he's jealous because none of his books ever won any awards.
And his books were published by the New York Times, by the way.
Yes. The day after the Oscars, Janet Maslin, who had written a very critical review of JFK, wrote an article on the awards ceremony. Now, JFK did win for editing and for cinematography. And she wrote this is unusually cruel. Only occasionally did the evening sound a nostalgically embarrassing note when one of the editors of JFK offered a taste of what a big JFK win would have sounded like. And she quotes from his acceptance speech. It's rare that a man has the courage to seek out the higher truth, ... as if you know the rest, you've heard it all before, and isn't it silly? And that's very mean. This editor had done a hell of a job editing the film, goes up there to accept his award, makes a nice statement about the film, and he's ridiculed by the New York Times. Now, Jonathan Demme, if you remember his acceptance speech, was this long, rambling, it just went on forever, it was silly, and they talk about how affecting it was. Well, you know, they don't have an agenda. Back to the Bellin article. It's called Earl Warren's Assassins. David Bellin likes to think that we're hanging Earl Warren all the time. The most biting damnation of Earl Warren and the whole JFK debate actually came from Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He referred to him in a Washington Post op-ed as a Chief Justice of no great intellect, but Bellin never picked up on that. Anyway, this particular op-ed is talking about a study guide that Warner's put out in conjunction with the movie. There was a lot of noise made about the study guide. A lot of state legislatures, a lot of right-wing legislators and state assemblies tried to put through legislation saying that it would be banned from their public schools because it was a propaganda document. Now, they hadn't even seen it yet. As Bellin said, Warner Brothers wants to spread the disinformation of JFK into our public schools, in effect brainwashing students through the power of a commercial film and rewriting history the Hollywood way. I'm going to quote from the study guide, and this is History in the Hollywood Way. You may also want to remind students that finding facts is only the first step in the responsible use of free speech. In discussing this point, you might review 3 basic guidelines for research. One of those guidelines is hidden agendas. Often, the best research effort is flawed because we expect the outcome to fit into preconceived notions. Urge your students to put the brakes on any such tendency. It can prevent a researcher from seeing new connections and from applying new insights to old evidence. An important step in this direction would be to ignore the camps, liberal, conservative, and the like, into which modern society places authors and their writings. What's important is to read widely and well.
Excellent.
It's not propaganda. This is basic stuff. The people who prepared this, they hadn't seen the film, they hadn't seen the script. They did this on their own. Yet David Bellin calls that brainwashing. The problem with this stuff is if people read this and learn this way, they're not going to believe David Bellin. One of the funnier attacks on the film, this isn't going to be published because it got ridiculed before it was printed. It's Tom Clancy, who has a little cottage industry, and the basis for that is the Cold War, which now seems to be over. So he's got problems, but he's probably made enough money off his movies to keep him satisfied. He finds fault with our postulation that the FBI never thoroughly investigated the Kennedy assassination. And here's why. Who were the agents of the FBI in 1963? They were, for the most part, Irish Catholic Americans. Kennedy was also an Irish Catholic American, the first Catholic president. I remember how my parents felt about that. For the agents to have covered up the methodology of his death would of necessity have been an explicit betrayal of one of their own, in addition to being a violation of professional ethics and training, tossing the religious aspect to the crime, since a lot of these people go to church every week. And yet, in the subsequent 30 years, not a single special agent of the FBI has found himself approaching death and needful of expunging this crime from his conscience. Perhaps Oliver Stone is unaware of this, but Catholics, like Jews, know about guilt. It's just that Jews are born with guilt, whereas we fish eaters learn it in school. It is inconceivable that one of these people would have felt the need to clear his conscience. It simply does not coincide with human nature. Now, what does that mean?
It's bizarre.
That's how JFK was off base. We were also criticized by Henry Kissinger, who refused to see the movie. He says, I absolutely refuse to see the film JFK. I don't deny there may have been some plot involved and that more than one person may have been shooting in Dealey Plaza, but to stretch it into saying the Vice President and the CIA and the FBI were somehow involved in this is going beyond the bounds of decency. So is bombing a neutral nation. Oh, here's another. This is a recent headline about the files. This shows what you see in two different papers. But one good thing about working for Warner Brothers is they get every paper in the world and do all these clippings from it, the most minor things we get. I have two articles here. One is from the San Francisco Examiner. The other is from the LA Times. They run the exact same wire service copy. This is from May 13th. This is after the hearings at the Senate. The LA Times headline reads, "File data shows CIA kept tabs on Lee Oswald," and they have the AP copy about it. The San Francisco Examiner headline over the exact same copy reads, "Little heed paid by CIA to Oswald before JFK killed." Okay. So you figure that one out. Also about the Newsweek article that Jerry mentioned, I just wanted to say that we have a scene in the movie where Jim Garrison quotes from that Ainsworth article about Garrison. And we had to get clearance to use it, which meant we had to call the Newsweek legal department and say, is it okay if we quote from this article? And that's just a technicality. You always have to do that. Until they said, okay, fax us the article. So we faxed it to them, and they called us up right away and said, we really wish you wouldn't use this. And we said, well, why not? And they said, well, it's libelous. And we said, you printed it. And they said, yeah, but we wouldn't do that now. And we said, well, this was 1967. You printed it then. We're just going to read from it. We're not commenting on it. I mean, the idea was he's just reading a number of things that criticize him. And they said, well, you know, if you read it on screen, you renew the statute of limitations on libel. So we had to get a letter from Jim Garrison saying that he would not sue them if we read that on the screen.
Isn't it public domain?
What?
Isn't it after it's published, isn't it a public domain?
No. Newsweek still had the thing of it. Also, on recreating footage, I just want to note that privately, at different functions, would meet with a lot of news people. And one night I had a very long discussion with Ted Koppel. And he was saying that he didn't like the way we used real footage and fiction footage mixed together so you couldn't tell what was what. And I said, well, like what? And he said, well, like where Ruby shoots Oswald. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he didn't want to elaborate. And I said, well, wait a minute. And I said, was that the real footage or fake footage? And he didn't know. Now, I don't know if it was a question of whether Ruby really shot Oswald or not, but those are the kind of people we confused. But so I said, well, you know, you fault us for recreating things, but any time a news show, whether it's 60 Minutes or Hard Copy or your local nightly news, whenever they do an interview with somebody or a feature piece on someone, and then they show either the executive using his computer or the veterinarian examining the cat or somebody talking on the phone, that person is doing that for the camera. It's not a spontaneous act. They've gone in there and said, okay, now we want to film you talking on the phone, or we want to film you in front of your computer, or we want to film you using your new gadget or whatever. That's a recreation. They're used all the time. They're not harmful. This is just a way of presenting things. And that's purporting to be news. We didn't purport to be news. We never said we were anything but a fiction film. But I think we all have to be aware of the level of recreation on these so-called legitimate news channels. I guess we'll take questions now.
I've got a mic right here. I'm going to come up, and I think what I'll do is I'd like to come up this side first, and if you think you have some questions or comments, I'll come up here, then I'll go back up this way.
Can I just do one postscript
Sure.
to what Jane did? What we're seeing that happened to Oliver Stone happened to the critics of the Warren Commission, happened to all the early criticism of the assassination. And, you know, I mean, we may think it's all spontaneous, but there really have been some documents that have been released through the Freedom of Information Act through the years that make you wonder. The FBI and the CIA were obsessed with criticism of the Warren Report, going back to, in 1964, the FBI had surveillance on Mark Lane and Marguerite Oswald. And that was surveillance, by the way, which was requested by the Warren Commission. This is an article in July 1968. Not an article, I'm sorry, this was a CIA document that was distributing an article attacking Jim Garrison and to various operatives of the CIA. The article is not meant for reprinting in any media. It is forwarded primarily for your information and for the information of all station personnel. If the Garrison investigation should be cited in your area in the context of renewed anti-U.S. attacks, you may use the article to brief interested assets. There were other articles in documents in 1967 which said much the same thing, basically briefing their agents on how they should nurture their assets to make sure that the criticism of the Warren Commission is thoroughly rebutted in the media.
They also request that that their agents give them the names and addresses of people who persist in talking about the Warren Report.
One of the more sinister aspects, I think, is you may remember Hale Boggs, who was a conservative Louisiana Democratic congressman who was a member of the Warren Commission. He shocked the world one day by getting up on the floor of the House and basically calling J. Edgar Hoover a fascist and saying that the FBI was an American Gestapo. And his plane disappeared on a flight over Alaska a few months after that. And several years later, his son gave some rather interesting information to the Washington Post. And in this case, the Post hasn't had a stellar track record in this either, but it's to their credit that they published this article, and it's to the discredit of the rest of the media that nobody picked it up. The name of the article was Hill Data Confirmed by FBI. Although FBI officials have denied that information from the files is leaked to the press or public, the son of the late House Majority Leader Hale Boggs has told the Post that the FBI leaked to his father damaging material on the personal lives of the critics of its investigation into John F. Kennedy's assassination. Thomas Hale Boggs Jr. said his father, who was a member of the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination and his handling by the FBI, was given material in an apparent attempt to discredit the critics. The material which Thomas Boggs made available includes photographs of sexual activity and reports on alleged communist affiliations of some authors of articles and books on the assassination. Boggs, a Washington lawyer, said the experience played a large part in his father's decision to publicly charge the FBI with Gestapo tactics in a 1971 speech alleging the Bureau had wiretapped his telephone and that of other congressmen. The impact on him was, if they had had all this information on the critics and gave it to him and went to all this trouble, what do they have on us members of Congress, he said.
That's exactly. I want to thank Jerry Policoff on the JFK assassination and the media, and Jane Rusconi on the film JFK and the media.
If I may, I have a quick question for each of you. Jane, with regard to the Oscar Awards, the efforts to suppress interest in the film and discredit it, they sharpened the focus just before the awards. You mentioned the article in the New York Times by David Balin around early March. In the last 3 paragraphs, he changed course and said the Academy members would be disgraced if they were to vote for JFK. There was a half-page article on the op-ed page in the New York Times.
Yeah, actually,
Oliver Stone replied a couple of days later, and mildly in Daily Variety. 3 days or 4 days after that, the entire David Balin article was reprinted as an advertisement in Daily Variety.
Yeah, I have some friends who are reporters at Daily Variety, so when that came out, I called them up because David Balin does not subscribe to Daily Variety. And not only that, he doesn't know what day the Oscar ballots go out. So somebody had to have placed that article knowing when this was going to happen. There were 2 logical suspects, and the people I talked to at Variety, I said, find out who really did place that. And they couldn't find out for sure, but two different groups came up. One was the New York Times, the other one was Jack Valenti. It's clear that was a conspiracy. Balin did not act alone.
I might mention that the night of the Oscar Awards, Swiftly Lazar gave his usual party at Spago, and at the table of honor, they had Madonna and Walter Cronkite. Gene Siskel interviewed Cronkite, said Cronkite told him he was glad JFK didn't win. Now, finishing this, I would like to pay tribute to a local critic who early and strongly boosted and came out for JFK, didn't waver in face of all the brickbats, and that's Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Well, you know, Roger, not only did Roger like the movie, but he actually has read a lot on the assassination and knew the whole story and was able to supplement his review with that, and we were really thrilled with his support.
Thank you.
He did about a 10-minute segment on one of his shows where he interviewed Costner. This was after they reviewed the film, and they basically said that they castigated the media for the attacks on the film, and they said that Oliver Stone ought to be heralded as a great patriot for having put this movie out instead of being lambasted by the press.
And Jerry, I have a question for you. I've been collecting particularly op-ed articles and a few editorials in the Dallas Morning News, New York Times, Washington Post, and LA Times since last spring, when Lardner and the local fellow John came out against the movie. And I spoke about this on the closing night at the Symposium, saying this one thing had not been discussed, the collusion of the major media in protecting and perpetuating the Warren Commission report. Now, more recently, I mean this year, you see these big-name columnists coming out in the op-ed sections of the most prestigious papers and lending their byline to things they know nothing about. Now, George Will, earlier this year, George Will, Washington Post syndicate, came out in a very scathing article about Stone, the movie, calling him a sociopath, compared him to Goebbels and Hitler. And he quotes as getting his information from George Lardner. Anthony Lewis of the New York Times, he says he gets his information from David Balin. But what was most kind of outrageous, on one of the Sunday morning news shows, the John McLaughlin program, he has a panel of 4, and they were discussing the Warren Commission report earlier this year. They expressed their opinions. he called for a vote. It was split. 2 Warren Commission supporters, 2 conspiracy. And immediately after that vote, he said, the Warren Commission, the Warren Commission. But before he asked for the vote, he made a very interesting comment during the discussion. Did you see this week, Pete Hamill came out in the New York Post and said that Bobby Kennedy extradited Marcello to Puerto Rico? Now that tells you, the man doesn't know what he's talking about. Anyone with any knowledge at all knows that he did extradite or throw Marcello out of the country. But more importantly, to
Just put him on
Guatemala.
a plane and dumped him out of the country, illegally as a matter of fact.
Illegally, but to Guatemala. So here's a man on a nationwide Sunday morning TV show expressing himself on this matter when he obviously hadn't done any research on it at all. So how did that come down? Who communicated?
Right.
Did someone say, John, on your Sunday program, endorse the Warren Commission report?
I think ignorance is strictly done on an individual basis.
But who's communicating? Who's
Well, these guys
coordinating?
don't feel any responsibility. We interviewed David Bellin, by the way, for the Village Voice article. I'm sorry, not David Bellin, but Anthony Lewis. Anthony Lewis was reporting on the assassination. He was the Supreme Court correspondent for the New York Times back in 1963, idolized the ground that Earl Warren walked on, which I think presented a conflict from day one. He was a favored source. I mean, he was leaked. He had a preview of the entire Warren report that ran on the front page of the Times in May of 1960, April or May. It was several months before the report came out. A basic, almost verbatim preview of what the report was going to say. And by the way, they were just then beginning their field investigation. He admitted to my co-author in the Village Voice article that he's never read a critical book about the Warren report and never will, because it's too painful.
Right. So who's coordinating that? How's that communication coming down to get these famous writers to lend their byline to things they know nothing about?
Well, you know, Tom Wicker's another one. Tom Wicker wrote the introduction to the New York Times edition of the House Assassinations report. He castigated the House Assassinations Committee for coming up with a finding of conspiracy based on the acoustics test. There's a section in Anthony Summers' book where he doesn't name the person, but he talks about having been to a book party and there were all these, it was a very posh affair on Park Avenue, and he mentions that particular introduction, and it, by the way, was James Reston. I'm sorry, Tom Wicker. And Tom Wicker and his wife were both at the function, and his wife, I don't know whether they had a fight that morning or what, but his wife commented that, oh, he didn't even read that report. He was under pressure. He was under copy deadlines. He wrote that without even reading the report. And Wicker later, after the, basically later in the evening, acknowledged to Tony Summers that he was rather embarrassed. He did write that without reading the report, and he asked Summers for a copy of his book, and he said, you know, call me. I'd really like to, you know, look into this, and he never returned a phone call.
But how's that being arranged? Who's coordinating?
It's not arranged. It's not arranged. It's a matter of people not doing their work from the start and then not doing it in the end either. It's not that, well, when you talk about ignorance, when you talk about Pete Hamill getting the country wrong for this or whatever.
You know, John McLaughlin.
Oh, John McLaughlin.
He didn't know that Kennedy had thrown Marcello out of the country and even had the country wrong.
But see, that's okay because we can correct him on that. What you can't correct is when somebody is narrow-minded and isn't willing to listen or isn't willing to explore other things. You have people like Robert Greene in New York Newsday, who's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for investigation, very renowned reporter. He runs this article where he interviews G. Robert Blakey, and Blakey offers, they talk about the grassy knoll gunman, and Blakey says, oh, but the evidence seems to indicate that the grassy knoll gunman was there to shoot Oswald. Now that's crazy. But someone like Greene doesn't even question it and just goes ahead and prints it. Then he feels obligated to defend it later on because he printed it in the first place and his reputation's on the line. It's not coordinated. It's people digging their own holes and digging in deeper.
I had a couple of quick questions. So basically, the study guide, if you could let people know how to obtain that, and also the excellent film that was shown last night. Is that going to be available on videotape, or what format is it possible for people to see that?
The film will be out on video. I'm not sure who's putting it out. It's a documentary like that has an awful lot of post-production work involved, and that's why it's taken a little while to get out. The study guide, I have one copy, and I'm at a loss to tell you how to get more. I think if you go call the people in New York, I think Peter Whitney knows.
I got a copy. It's very brief. There's not a lot there, but you can get a poster as well. And I can't remember the name of the company.
Learning Enrichment Services.
All information we can talk to you in staff address.
A question for each of you. I'd like to know a little bit about Arlen Specter's threat to sue Oliver Stone, and also for Jerry, tell us a little bit about Orville Nix's problems with the, I don't know if it was AP or UPI, and also CBS and his daughter and that story behind that.
Well, Arlen Specter, I don't know how he can sue. If he were to sue, he would have to go to court and prove that he had evidence to support the magic bullet theory. I don't think he's going to do that. Right now, Arlen Specter is worried about re-election, and he has big problems there. Even his Republican opponent was handing out campaign literature outside theaters that were showing JFK. All over the country, when his name was mentioned, there'd always be some sort of like hooting or hissing or clapping and whatever. We didn't know that that was going to happen. The Hill hearings, or the Anita Hill hearings, hadn't happened when we shot that scene. We shot it in July. Originally, Arlen Specter's name wasn't even in the script. But when we were rehearsing the scene, Kevin Costner said, well, what's the name of this guy who made up this theory? And I said, Arlen Specter. And he said, well, what's he do now? I said, well, he's a senator. And he said, oh, I want to say his name. So we just said, fine, go ahead. And that's how it got in there, purely by chance. And then in October, we have that big fallout, and suddenly everybody knows who Arlen Specter is. And it added a really funny moment to the movie, totally gratuitous.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Peter Whitney. Some of you might be familiar with an article I wrote for Third Decade called The Man Who Heard Too Much, November 1990, and I'd like to share a little bit of information I've received since then and get some feedback from Jane and Jerry. It's basically about a man in Winnipeg, Canada, who overheard two people at the airport discussing the assassination only less than 3 months after and came to the conclusion that they were involved. He wanted that story to get out, and the first place he went to, which I learned through a decoded copy of an FBI telegram, urgent, April 1st, 64, he, according to this report, he contacted the station manager, Richard Vincent, who's actually, his name's blacked out, but I learned his name later, at KCND-TV, Pembina, North Dakota. Telephonically advised today, Richard Giesbrecht, Winnipeg, Canada, for past 3 weeks has been in contact with him relating had contacted attorney Backlund and been interviewed by FBI. Giesbrecht gave considerable information to Vincent. Seems quite persistent in wanting some, and I can't read that part. Acts like child, having secret and must tell, something, blah, blah, blah. Says he fears for safety of his family. I've learned from one of his sons since that his family was threatened. Vincent has contacted ABC News in New York, no particular interest. I learned from Mr. Vincent, who now lives in Winnipeg, that he did call them after having a lengthy interview with Mr. Giesbrecht, who came down in the middle of a snowstorm, 70 miles, to tell him about what he had heard about 2 weeks after he'd been interviewed by the FBI. And Mr. Vincent called ABC, had a very small station, asked them if they were interested in following up the story, doing a report on it. They said it's just another nutcase, don't worry about it, and basically wrote it off. So, we hear a lot about CBS, NBC. We rarely hear anything about ABC. I did discover, coincidentally, that after John Daly died a couple of years ago, they reported in the paper that not only was he the host of What's My Line, but he was vice president in charge of news, special events, and public affairs in the 1960s, and he was married to Earl Warren's daughter. Now, I personally think that ABC, especially being third man on the totem pole, they were getting into wide world sports and things like that, and Maverick and Cheyenne and so forth, but they weren't big on news. As I recall, in the early 60s, I think they squashed the story under pressure from the FBI, and amazingly, you know, the story actually was front page news in Winnipeg a month later, and later in the year was a major article in Maclean's magazine out of Toronto, and yet to show the power of the American press, Mr. Giesbrecht couldn't get his story aired in the United States till 1968, when he had to sort of reluctantly go to National Enquirer with it. And actually, they did a really good job. They wrote an excellent report, but I'd like some feedback on it.
Well, you know, I mean, ABC really doesn't come to the forefront when you're talking about the media, because they really haven't been as aggressive as NBC and CBS and the New York Times and the Washington Post in terms of just being at the, well, Jane?
They weren't really together as a network in 1963, so I think maybe because they completely missed the story in the beginning, they haven't felt the need to defend it either.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't been as bad as anybody else or the other two, which doesn't mean they've been good. You know, I mean, the media, they continue to miss the story. I mean, we know what kind of headlines the JAMA article got, and it's a non-story. Cyril Wecht and Dr. Crenshaw held a press conference totally rebutting it. Nobody picked it up.
By the way, subsequently, about 5 days later, FBI sent their agent interviews with this, and according to their report, he wasn't sure if it was even believable, the whole story. I spoke to the convinced last year. He immigrated to Canada in the early 70s, and Mr. Vincent told me that what the FBI said in the report is not true. Completely believed it, and he found it especially convincing because the man came down and stayed in the middle of the snowstorm. Jeff doesn't do some of the safety that could have waited the next day. There was a big rush on it.
You recognize the researcher. In case you want the longer story, I urge you to see him out in the hall on the hill. I think he'd be very happy to brief you on it. All right. One final word on the John Daly relationship. He was a very close friend of Dorothy Kilgallen, and he's one of the sources for a number of statements that her Jack Ruby notes were missing after her alleged suicide. And I knew some people around the What's My Line show. I worked in New York in television and in news, among other things. And she drank, sometimes heavily, and she used barbiturates, sometimes heavily. But all of her friends, including Considine Daly and her husband, were absolutely certain she never drank and used barbiturates simultaneously. She died of an overdose of alcohol and barbiturates.
And she was writing a book, and I don't believe the notes have ever been found.
According to Daly and Considine, the notes disappeared. Yeah, I'm going to come over here first, and then over there, and then over there.
Can I read one other quick document? Because this is, you know, when we're just talking about the media, there's a mindset. There's a reporter, there was a reporter with the Dallas Morning News, Earl Goltz.
It's the Austin American Statesman.
Okay, he's with the Austin American Statesman now. We talked about Hugh Ainsworth before. I mean, Ainsworth wrote one scurrilous article after another defending the lone assassin theory. Earl Goltz is probably the only working reporter in the United States who has doggedly pursued this case, followed up leads. He's come up with many leads. He tracked down the Bronson film, which may show two people in the 6th floor window. Earl was eventually fired from the Dallas Morning News. And